Whalen and Alex Barutha here. You're listening to the RotoWire Fantasy Basketball Podcast. Hopefully you're watching along on the RotoWire Fantasy Basketball YouTube channel as well. We'll be recapping the weekend, talking about the week ahead. It's finally here, Alex. 5-game week for the Brooklyn Nets. We've been foreshadowing this, talking about it for weeks. So if you're throwing McCall Bridges out there, congratulations. We'll get some schedule notes as well. Heavy week overall. A lot of 4-game weeks in the NBA. Talk about some injuries and hit some big picture items. As always, give us some questions in the chat. We're coming up on the fantasy playoffs, down to that stretch run. If you're wondering about any moves, if you're wondering who to pick up, who to start, throw those in the chat. We will hit those throughout the show. And if we get a bunch of questions in there, we'll go rapid fire at the end. Alex, it's Monday. How was your weekend? Anything major go down for you in Madison?
Nothing major. I mean, I rewatched the movie Face Off. Not sure if you're a Face Off guy.
Is that a hockey movie?
No, everybody thinks it's a hockey movie. It's John Travolta and Nick Cage, and it's like an action movie, and they swap faces.
What?
It's an all-time action movie, in my opinion. Nick Cage is at his absolute peak. They're sort of pretending to be each other. Nick Cage is evil. John Travolta is good. It's a cop robber sort of a thing. It's if you love like unintentional comedy, the sort of like late 90s action movie stuff, you will lose your mind at this. Johnny loves this movie.
Yeah, Johnny Tovar in the chat says great movie with 5 exclamation points. So is it? You said unintentional comedy. Is there any hint of intentional comedy?
Yeah,
just like the idea of switching faces, like you can only take that so seriously.
Yeah, so it was sort of at the time, in movies. I think it came out in 97. Where I think action movies were still fine, like taking themselves like 75% seriously, and then 25% like they know it's all tongue in cheek in a way. And Nick Cage, anytime Nick Cage brings a performance, it's always insane. But yeah, I needed a rewatch. We watched it on VHS the right way, and it was just, I think it was funnier the second time around, to be honest.
Well, anybody who knows me or has listened to me on the radio or podcasts over the years knows that I do not watch movies. So it goes without saying that I have not seen that movie and probably never will. But I appreciate you giving me the synopsis. Like, this is part of the reason I don't watch movies is I hear about them and I'm like, all right, I know what happens. Like, what is there to watch here? I'm a big reader of movie Wikipedia pages. So okay. I've read a lot of movies. I've not watched a ton.
Is there a favorite movie that you've read?
Let me think. No, not really. I have like 4 movies that I like, and I just got to go back to those when I need to. But any TV recommendations, by the way, throw those in the chat, guys. I finished True Detective last week or a couple weeks ago, so we need something to fill that gap. Let's talk some basketball. I don't want to go too long on this hullabaloo before we talk injuries. Kind of a tough weekend in the fantasy basketball world, Alex. For one, we had a bunch of low-scoring games. The scoring debate seems to continue to wax and wane, where it feels like some nights everybody's scoring in the 140s, as Boston did yesterday, and some nights you have some competitive games, into the mid 80s and the 90s, as we saw on Friday. But we got to start with the injuries. Obviously, Trae Young last week, that was the big one. We got 3 more that we're keeping an eye on, and we'll start with Scottie Barnes, because I think this is probably the most concerning of the 3, the other 2 being Devin Booker and Jalen Brunson. And the Brunson one, Alex, I mean, at the time yesterday, I'm like, that looked bad, right? And then the Twitter doctors came out and were like, well, maybe he banged knees there. It looks like it might be a nerve issue, which would certainly be better, than a meniscus or an ACL. But Scottie Barnes, left hand fracture, they're saying, yeah, maybe he could come back in April. I don't know, Alex. I think this is kind of the green light for Toronto to see if they can hang on to, I think it's a top 6 protected pick that they owe. They were kind of waffling between pushing for a play-in spot and falling back anyway. And I don't really see the merit. This team's not going to win games without Scottie Barnes. And I don't see the merit in, bringing him back for a week or a week and a half at the end of the regular season.
Yeah, I agree with you. Barnes actually hasn't missed a game all year, other than the one he missed most recently. And so I think you're right. That pick is protected top 1 to 6 to San Antonio. They've kind of been hovering. They're 3 losses behind of, however you want to phrase it, Memphis. Possibly, it might be able to catch them. I mean, Memphis is trying their absolute best to continue to lose games. But I think now, yes, you do. you feel like you should at least give it the old college try of not trying.
Well, and so part of it is ideally, you'd get into that bottom 6 and you're like, all right, odds are we will pick 6th, but you're also increasing your chances to jump into that top 4. So I think that makes that decision, which maybe Toronto had been leaning that way anyway. I think that makes it a little bit easier. I think the obvious question is, are you dropping Scottie Barnes? Especially if you're in contention right now, you need to fill that spot. You can't necessarily afford to wait it out, or you're in a head-to-head league and the playoffs start in a couple of weeks. Are you totally comfortable cutting bait?
I would say there's like a 90% chance at least that it's just fine to cut Scottie Barnes. If you're in a weekly waivers league, just wait. And even if you're in a daily waivers league, I would maybe just see what they say, because there's a chance that within a few days they, Woj or Shams or somebody comes out with a report about a real timetable, which doesn't always happen right away. But what are the chances, Scottie Barnes comes back from a broken hand this late in the season? It just doesn't really seem like it's going to happen.
Yeah. Right. And it is important to note as the sun comes out here and obscures my vision, it is important to note that there isn't a timetable, but like you said, it's a broken hand. It's an injury that we could look back and say, all right, X number of players have suffered this injury. You're not coming back in 2 weeks. It's probably 4 weeks at the absolute minimum. So I don't really see a whole lot of upside, with that. And I think you're right. 90% chance that you're probably good dropping him sounds about right. Beneficiaries in Toronto, what is the trickle down effect here? I suppose we probably see more Grady Dick. I don't know that gets me all that much more excited about him. It's like more minutes in theory equals more production, but it's not like they're handing the reins over to him, right? I think if anything, you get a usage boost for RJ Barrett, you get a usage boost for Emmanuel Quickly. We probably see a little bit more Ochai Agbaji, who moved into the starting lineup yesterday against Charlotte and actually looked pretty good. I mean, he took 20 shots in 33 minutes, 13 points, 9 rebounds, 2 blocks. Didn't shoot it well, was 1 of 7 from 3. But if we're just looking at that small sample, first game all year, like you said, without Scottie Barnes, I think Agbaji, who they got from Utah midseason, he's probably the guy. And, we maybe see a little bit more of Jordan Nwora off the bench as well. But for me, he's probably a deep leagues only.
Yeah, we'll note, I double-checked this. Jeff Stotts on Twitter, who has done some work for us in the past, tweeted about the Barnes injury and said, time lost for broken hand will be determined by the nature of the break and subsequent treatment. Average time lost for a third metacarpal that did not need surgery is 12 games. Average time for a person who got surgery, 18 games. So in theory, he could come back. He also notes that Wendell Carter missed 20 games earlier in the season with one that required surgery. So maybe Barnes comes back at the end of the year. But again, we're dealing with a very different situation at the end of the year than like Wendell Carter at the beginning of the season or something like that.
21 games remaining for Toronto, for what it's worth.
Good note. Yeah, I mean, they traded for Agbaji. They got Olynyk in that deal as well. But I think that was really a trade for Agbaji that they pulled off. So, getting him in there, getting him 33 minutes. I think he will be a beneficiary. 20 shots is crazy. He's been a low usage guy in Utah. So look, maybe they'll tell him you have the green light. Shoot it every time you're open. Try to make some stuff happen offensively. That's possible. Yeah, you mentioned Nwora got 18 minutes. There's been times where he's not been shy about shooting, but I don't think he's fantasy relevant unless he's getting like 28 minutes a game or something like that. And I think Grady Dick, again, he has the potential to be a little bit more than a 3-point shooter. I think further on in his career, like I think he could end up being kind of a Max Strus who cuts and he can make passes and he's got size so he can rebound and stuff like that. But as of right now, I think he's mostly just a 3-point guy. So as of like you mentioned, Agbaji seems like the guy from one sample.
Yeah, I think with Dick, and you saw a lot of this when he was at Kansas and through the draft process. It was a lot of like, this is not Kyle Korver. All right, he may look like Kyle Korver, but he is not Kyle Korver. And I just think this early in his career, he kind of is just a spot up guy. I'd like to see a little bit more, expansion of what they offer him down the stretch. But between Barrett and Quickly, it's like there's just not that many times where you're asking Grady Dick to do that. So I think the Strus comp is really good because he's still a shooter first and foremost, and that's what Grady Dick is going to be. But he's also not going to be a guy who's going to struggle to average like 1 assist per game. He's got great size. He rebounded really well at Kansas. He was over 5 boards a game, in about 32 minutes. He's got really good size, good athleticism, for his age and for his position. So Really interested in him in dynasty leagues. I think he's somebody that could help you a ton in threes down the stretch. But for me, it's Agbaji that gets the biggest bump, and then just probably Barrett and quickly after that. Devin Booker out at least 7 to 10 days. That's per Shams Charania, dealing with an ankle injury. He did not play yesterday against OKC, tweaked that ankle against Houston the night before. It just keeps happening for Phoenix, man. Whether it's been mostly Beal, Booker's has missed his time. Durant's missed a few games here and there, but here we go again, where Bradley Beal's been back in the lineup for 2 games, and he plays one of those with Devin Booker. Beal was on a minutes restriction in that game, and 2 nights later, Devin Booker's out. So nothing too devastating. You're obviously not dropping Devin Booker. You're hoping it's just a week absence for him, but still a pretty big hit at this point in the season.
It's a big hit. I think we, for the most part, just know what's going to happen. I don't think there's a lot of mystery in terms of who benefits. More touches for Bradley Beal. We were recommending Royce O'Neal, partially because the Suns are so injured all the time. That's going to continue. Eric Gordon steps in, takes more shots. Grayson Allen takes some more shots once in a while. Seems like they're interested in giving Saban Lee some more run. But it's almost kind of decided what they're, what's going to happen here.
Yeah, it's a 3-game week for Phoenix this week, so that's nice. It is a 4-gamer next week, so hopefully this is a shorter term injury. Maybe you can get back for that, and then they play 3 games the week of March 18th. It's one thing for fantasy; it's another thing for where Phoenix stands in real life, right? I mean, they are currently in the 7th spot right now by virtue of not having the tiebreaker over Sacramento. Both of those teams, in terms of games behind the 1 seed, sitting at 7.5. They're a game up on Dallas. They are 2.5 up on Golden State and the Lakers. And this is a team that I think has proven, certainly more so than the Warriors and the Lakers have, that they could survive these injuries. They don't completely bottom out, when they're missing one of those big 3. But they lost 2 in a row to Houston and OKC. Coming out of the break, they lost to Houston and Dallas, and they're at Denver tomorrow night. That's a tough game without Booker. Then they get Toronto, but then they're home against Boston and at Cleveland after that. So kind of a bit of a dicey stretch coming up here for Phoenix, likely not having Booker for at least a handful of those games. And they actually play Boston again next Thursday. So you would hope that Booker's back for that, but this could pretty easily be a stretch. You could see them, losing to any of those teams, even with Devin Booker at Denver, Boston, Cleveland, Boston. This might be the opportunity here, if Golden State and the Lakers could string something together to at least trim into that lead that Phoenix has for the 7, because I'm pretty sure at this point that the Warriors and Lakers are going to be play-in teams, I should say. But you'd much rather be sitting in 7th or 8th than you would 9th or 10th. Yeah,
I agree. I mean, you have 6 teams within 3.5 games of each other in the West, the 5 through 10. So that's going to be jumbled up, I think, the rest of the season, and could end up like really in any order, because so many of these teams are actually veteran teams or have guys who have been injury prone. But I do think you're right. It does seem like Warriors and Lakers are almost destined to be playing teams at this point. But it's just the West continues to be very jumbled up in the middle.
Yeah, tough stretch coming up for the Lakers as well. They, of course, lost to Denver on Saturday. The 40,000 point LeBron game, which it feels like every game where he's passed some sort of milestone with the Lakers, they find a way to lose that game. So that was kind of par for the course. But they got OKC, Sacramento, Milwaukee, Minnesota, Sacramento, Golden State. Their next 6 games taking us through the end of next week. So that I would like to say that stretch will tell us a lot about the Lakers, but based on what we've seen from them this season, I expect them to somehow just go 3-3 and we're back to square one.
Yeah, they just I don't know. It seems like they pushed a lot of their chips in for the in-season tournament, and then just have not been able to figure it out since then. And I think we're into almost like an airplane mode. And now I think they're trying to ramp it back up again, as LeBron and AD sort of, we're nearing the playoffs. So they're kind of tough to predict.
Yeah, they are. They are, but at the same time, they aren't. It's like I just feel like they're predictably average. We have enough of a sample now, and like in years past, it was always like, well, they didn't have AD for 15 games, or they didn't have LeBron for 15 games. Like they've had their guys, and they've just shown us time and time again that they're a slightly above average team. That even with that being the case, you still don't want to face them, right? Like if you're Phoenix or you're Sacramento or you're New Orleans, and that's your win and in game to actually make the playoffs, like that's still a scary opponent. And I think the one thing with the Lakers, no matter how the first 82 games go, like they still believe that they're like a top 3 team in the West, and we'll be just fine in a play-in setting. Whether that ultimately proves to be true, we will see. We mentioned Jalen Brunson, by the way. That was, of course, the other big injury yesterday. If you're listening to this or watching this, you probably saw the play. When you review it, you can kind of see Brunson did bump knees with Hartenstein. Kind of looked like he shook it off initially, came off the screen, took a mid-range jumper, and like kind of in midair, released the ball and then started grabbing at the knee. I mean, this looked really bad at first, really, really bad. He's down in a heap. He's getting helped off the floor. You're obviously thinking, torn ACL, meniscus, at best. But then the Twitter doctors came out, and you could see, I think it was his left foot. It's kind of like dragging on the ground. And then you get into like this thing called foot drop, which I was reading up on last night, which would imply potentially that it could be a nerve injury. And that we still don't have anything definitive. X-rays came back negative. I think they initially said knee soreness, and they importantly listed him as questionable to return instead of just the dreaded like out for game right away. So I think there is still a pretty decent degree of optimism here that he's avoided anything serious. With that said, when you're dealing with a potential nerve issue or even a bruise to that knee, I still think he misses some amount of time here. Got to be at least a couple of games. They play tomorrow at Atlanta or against Atlanta, and then Friday against Orlando, and they finish out their 3-game week Sunday against Philly. I'd be pretty surprised if he's out there tomorrow, but the schedule kind of works in their favor given the timing of the injury.
It does. And then we saw when Brunson went down, we saw 47 minutes of Miles McBride off the bench. Pretty awesome stuff. And of course, really short bench for Thibodeau. They signed Shake Milton. Yeah. So, maybe within the next week or so, he might be useful in fantasy. But again, at the same time, Tibbs hates new guys. He likes playing his guys. So it's like, maybe we will get 40 minutes of Miles McBride and, 40 to 45 minutes of Josh Hart. And then Milton plays like 8 minutes. But yeah, we need more info before we make any sort of, real decisions on the waiver wire.
Yeah, I think McBride's the guy I'm most interested in right now. And, it was interesting. I don't believe he was picked up in the stake league, and I think part of that is just the belief that maybe Brunson doesn't miss that much time and you don't want to, go all in there. The 7 games this season in which McBride has played at least 30 minutes, he's averaged 15 points, 3 boards, 4 assists, 1.5 steals, and 2.9 made threes. So in just about any size league, 12 and up, I'm interested in that. And I'll probably wait until we get an update on Brunson. But if you're kind of looking for a weekly streamer for this week, or even just a 1-game streamer for tomorrow, great matchup against Atlanta. Like you said, we've seen this with Tibbs before. I mean, this could very easily, let's say Brunson misses 3 games. It would not be shocking at all if Miles McBride averages like 43 minutes a game in those 3.
Right. Yeah. I mean, McBride has really improved his 3-point shooting this season. That's been huge. Solid passer. Main thing for him, at least in the past, was his steals upside, which he's continued this season. Although not as high as last year, but yeah, someone who, if Brunson misses a week and a half, something like that, McBride should be picked up.
All right, let's go to the chat. We'll pull some questions out here. Keep throwing those in there, guys. We'll hit those throughout the show. Christian says, good afternoon, fellas. Thoughts on Taylor Hendricks in Utah? Should I drop Paul Reed or PJ Washington to pick up Hendricks? Well, if you're talking long-term, we'll see. We'll dive in on that. If you're looking at a streamer for tonight, I'm pretty interested because this is it's really a great matchup for both sides, the Wizards and the Utah Jazz. I'm pretty interested in some Kuzma props, some John Collins props tonight. And the reason for that is we have no Markkanen and no Walker Kessler. Markkanen dealing with a quad injury, and Walker Kessler, I'm on Kessler Edwards' page. That is the one that pops up first for some reason on our site. Walker Kessler still dealing with that foot injury. So this will be 3 absences in a row for him. We've started to see Taylor Hendricks integrate into this rotation, even when both of those guys are healthy. He had 13 boards. That was a season high against Miami over the weekend. So I think Utah, to me, is a team that pretty clearly is kind of backing their way out of the play-in race. I'd be monitoring the Markkanen and Kessler situations pretty closely because it wouldn't shock me if they did like a soft shutdown with either of those guys. So long-winded way of saying, yeah, I'm pretty interested in picking up Taylor Hendricks. I think we have to be realistic about what the ceiling is, but I also think he could be a 30-plus minute per game guy if we see Markkanen especially miss more time.
I agree. I just don't think you should drop Paul Reed or Washington for him.
Okay.
You look at Paul Reed's numbers, over the past, past month, past 2 weeks. Same with PJ Washington. I just don't know. I feel like Hendricks' ceiling is about what these guys are doing. So I would not drop what is not a sure thing with Reed in Washington, but has been pretty stable for a little while now.
Okay. Yeah. And so Philly has a 4-game week this week. Utah has a 3-game week. So if you're just kind of looking at how do I handle it for the week ahead, if you want to say it's comparable, I would give the edge to Paul Reed, especially when you're talking about players of this ilk, games played really matters. And then PJ Washington and Dallas, the Mavs do have a 3-game week, but PJ Washington is playing 31 to 35 minutes a night. That's been the case in 6 straight. The numbers have been pretty decent. The rebounding has been down a little bit since he left Charlotte. 3-point shooting's been all over the place, but he's been taking a ton. He's taken like 26 threes over the last 3 games. So I like what we've seen there. I did see a question in the chat about Daniel Gafford. So I want to find that while we're on the Mavericks. I know his minutes have kind of been on the decline of late, and I cannot find this question, Alex. Do you see it in there?
No, maybe.
There we go. All right, there we go. We got it from Danny Muzz. He says, anyone know what to do with Daniel Gafford? Looks like the move to the Mavs isn't going to be good for him. And he's asking about Zubac as well. He says he's got a few injuries. Those two not producing much is killing him. So we'll start with Gafford. I love the real life move to Dallas for him. What it meant for the Mavs, beefing up their front court, getting rid of Grant Williams. Initially, it looked like it was going to work out pretty well. Coming out of the All-Star break, it's been a disaster to the point where I think you probably got to drop it, right? He's averaging 14 and a half minutes per game over the last 6. So that includes 2 games where he didn't even get to 10 minutes.
I think he's probably a drop, unfortunately. As someone who's rostered Gafford like the entire season in multiple leagues. So this is a problem for me personally. But if he's, he, again, like you said, he played single-digit minutes in 2 games over the past 6. That to me just hints at, first of all, he's got huge foul issues. He's committed the most shooting fouls in the NBA. So, it's going to be hard for him to play 25 minutes regardless, to 30 minutes regardless. And to me, some of this might just be he doesn't have great chemistry with Doncic. And ultimately, he's out there for one thing, as is Derek Lively, as is Dwight Powell, to catch lobs from Luka Doncic, roll hard to the rim, and have good chemistry on that in that front. And if Doncic is just kind of out on him, which is possible, he's just not going to play that much. So unfortunately, I do think he's a drop. But we're at the time of the year where there are, you're going to have a lot of streaming options going forward, right? So you don't have to feel as bad about it right now as you would have if this was November.
Well, I think the big thing with Gafford is, the lobs are nice, the rebounds are nice, but you're in it for the blocks more than anything. And if those aren't going to be there, I think you have to look into other options. He doesn't have a multi-block game since February 12th. And that was against the Wizards, who absolutely, love being blocked. They invite being blocked every single night. Before the trade, he was basically a 2.2 to 2.5 blocks per game guy for most of the year. And now he's struggling to get to 1 a game. The block rate, interestingly enough, is basically exactly the same. If you look at the percentage of shots he's blocking in Dallas versus Washington, but obviously when you're basically cutting the minutes in half, that's going to have a huge effect. So I'm fine moving on from him, barring an injury to Lively or PJ Washington. I don't know that a ton changes there in terms of the fantasy relevant portion of the season. And then as far as Zubac goes, just kind of a weird stretch for him. He missed back-to-back games with an illness. He came back yesterday against Minnesota. Maybe he was on some sort of soft restriction. He was not in foul trouble. Although going up against Minnesota is a unique opponent. The Clippers were using 2 bigs. We saw more Daniel Tice, so that may have been part of it. But prior to the illness, he was still kind of right where you'd expect workload wise. 23 to 28 minutes most nights. So it's a rough week for Zubac for sure, but I don't think I would panic there yet.
No, I wouldn't panic there yet. You're rostering Zubac because he's giving you, roughly 10 and 10 every night. And again, you might be able to stream in that production on 4-game weeks from other guys. If you got like you're mentioning, you got guys who are injured. But like Nick said, I think this illness thing was a short-term thing. A tough matchup against Minnesota. I'm not, basically on Zubac. Talk to me next week on Zubac, and let's see what's going on.
Still 77% rostered in Yahoo leagues, if you're wondering about that. Alan says, thoughts on who to drop, Ivey or O'Neal or Kuminga, 9-cat, 12-team league. So my first inclination would be Royce O'Neal, but now we have this Devin Booker news, so he'll likely slot in and could be a starter for a week plus here. He strung together 2 pretty nice games in the last week. The 20-pointer against the Lakers, another 20-pointer against Houston. The steals have been there. He's blocking some shots lately. He's hitting a bunch of threes. So this is a legit debate. I still think there's a little more upside. With someone like Jaden Ivey, you're gonna have to live with the down games from him, of course. But I think you're going to get more consistent counting stats out of Ivey. With this being a 9-cat league, though, it depends. Are you willing to stomach the field goal percentage, and how badly do you need the threes and the defensive production from O'Neal versus the more consistent points and assists from Ivey?
Yeah, I would not drop Kuminga here. He's still playing too well. O'Neal versus Ivey is kind of interesting. Ivey has fallen off a bit over the past 2 weeks to a month. Especially again, really bad shooting, 34%. The assists are down. He's not giving you anything, steals and blocks. I agree with Nick. What categories do you need? If you need the stuff O'Neal is giving you, like if you need defensive production, if you need rebounds, if you need some threes, O'Neal's gonna be the guy I go with. If you just need raw points, I would just hang on to Ivey.
All right, Johnny says, I'm in first place with a 5-game cushion in a 10-team 9-cat league. Nice work. I just picked up Keyonte George from Utah, and he just got an injury tag. You think he'll play well tonight if he goes? Great question. Well, he's dealing with an illness, so this will likely be game time decision type of thing. They're down Kessler, they're down Markkanen. It's a great matchup against Washington. So I will say if he plays, even with the illness, I'm probably still comfortable starting him just because this is the best matchup in fantasy basketball right now. So, tough to say, what kind of illness is it? How was he affected? He's coming off of a huge game, 31 points, 6 threes the other night against a tough Miami team. He's been hitting about 3 threes a game at 40% over the last 15. So he's had the splash games, but he's been more consistent overall. We always say we don't have any more, injury insight than anybody else. We just report the news. But if he plays, I think I'd throw him out there, yeah.
I would for sure. Like Nick said, this is a cakewalk matchup. Washington, 14 straight losses. Worst defense in the NBA over the past month. Over-under on this game is 241. They're going to be getting up and down the court. If he plays, again, you never know. We don't have any more insight, but fire him up.
The Jazz are 5.5-point favorites, and they're down 2 of their 3 best players. That speaks to where we're at right now with Washington. All right, we got a trade question from Paul. He says, I got offered Cunningham and DiVincenzo for my Simons and Coby White. I'm punting field goal percentage and turnovers. So I think Simons and White's ceilings are higher. Not too sure if DiVincenzo can keep up his production. What do you guys think? 9-cat league. My first thought is the potential for a shutdown with Simons, right? And I think you're right. The higher ceiling here might be Simons plus Coby White. Coby White's had some disaster games recently, where the shooting is just completely fallen off a cliff. He did rebound with a decent game against Milwaukee on Friday, but he's 2 for 5, 2 for 13, 0 for 5, 2 for 9 from 3 over his last 4 games. So he's still playing a ton of minutes. So even his off nights, the counting stats have been there, and you've been able to survive it. And if you're punting field goal percentage, maybe you don't care about that. I guess one way I would look at this is there a potential Cunningham shutdown? Detroit obviously is kind of cinched up a bottom 4 record. So I guess I don't personally worry too much about that. And then the other point that Paul brings up is, DiVincenzo, what he's doing, is that sustainable? I would like to say no, but now in light of this Brunson situation, it might have to be.
It's not sustainable in the sense that Anunoby is going to come back and Randle is going to come back, and then there's just going to be a ton fewer shots for DiVincenzo. But if you're punting field goal percentage and turnovers, Simons is not going to kill you and White's not going to kill you there. This is a really interesting trade. I mean, based on what we've seen out of all 4 of these guys over the past month, it would be Cunningham and DiVincenzo that it would be on the side you want to be on.
Yeah.
I wouldn't mind doing that. Yeah, the Simons, I'd be a little worried about the Simons shutdown too, but Portland, I don't know. I feel like they have other guys they can shut down, right? Brogdon hasn't played in a long time. Jeremy Grant, they got other guys. I don't mind this. I think if you want to do this, go right ahead. I think, because even if DiVincenzo gets pushed back into a role that he was in earlier in the season, he's still probably going to be a top 120 player in that role. And Simons, for as good as he is like, he's ranked 79th this year. He's not ranked like 40th like we hoped he would be.
Yeah, I'm on the Cunningham DiVincenzo side of this. I think I would like to know a little more about Brunson. Like, if you could guarantee me that he misses, more than a week or two, then I think DiVincenzo has a nice runway. Like, I don't worry that much about OG coming back. I think he's going to beat Randle as far as that timetable goes. And it's like, Anunoby, he'll probably steal some minutes from DiVincenzo, but he's not like that high usage of a guy. Like, I still think they're going to ask DiVincenzo to be one of the big fill-ins for Brunson. So that would tip the scales in my favor. And then, the concerns about Simons being shut down and just playing for this terrible Portland team that has like no shooting and they're struggling to get to 90 points half the time. I would rather have Cunningham and DiVincenzo. All right, streaming question for tonight's slate: Huerter or Alex Caruso? These teams play each other. Chicago is on the road at Sacramento tonight. Huerter just kind of been doing his usual up and down. Hasn't been great the last couple of games, but you're obviously looking for the threes with him, some rebounds, some assists. Caruso, questionable tonight with a hamstring. He played against Milwaukee on Friday. He missed the previous game against Cleveland. He's been piling up a ton of steals. This is a points league. I think I would probably play it safe here and go Huerter. But reasonable question.
I would go Caruso. I mean, Caruso doesn't have the scoring upside as Huerter, but Huerter's going to have to deal with Caruso and Dosunmu defensively, and it's pace down for Kings, it's pace up for Chicago. And when Caruso, Caruso's hurt a lot, but when he plays after being questionable, he still plays like 30 minutes for the most part. So I'm not worried about the injury necessarily.
We got a question about Kelly Olynyk that we'll hit quickly, and Matt, chimed in the chat and says he's holding Olynyk right now with a Pirtle injury, and that's something I want to note. Olynyk played 26 and 28 minutes over the last two games to varied results. He's been piling up the defensive stats, which is nice. Rebounds, assists, those are going to vary night to night for him. Jakob Pirtle will miss at least one game. I believe he's dealing with a finger injury. Probably not anything that's super long-term, but I think Toronto in general just kind of has to be on watch the rest of the season, like in light of the Scottie Barnes situation where, maybe they're looking for excuses to have guys miss a handful of games here. Pirtle dislocated his finger the other night against Charlotte, so he will not play tomorrow night against the Pelicans. Good spot to stream Olynyk for sure. Need a little bit more info on is Pirtle going to miss, significant time here before, I'm going all in on Olynyk, but certainly holding him.
Yeah, you mentioned Olynyk. He's had a steal or a block in 6 straight games. And even though his minutes are kind of low, 2 games below 20 minutes, he still put up like decent numbers in those games. He's basically a little over a fantasy point per minute. So if you're, if he's out there for 24 minutes, you can roster him in almost any league. Yeah.
We got some Jabari Walker chatter in the chat. Kind of an interesting name to keep an eye on. If you're mining for late season value for a bad team in Portland, back-to-back double doubles for him, had 2 assists, 3 total steals and a block in those 2 games. Not really much of a shooter. Take a couple every now and then. He'll hit a couple, but not really looking for a whole lot of value from beyond the arc. For him, it's really more points and rebounds. Like, the defensive numbers have been very on and off. But interested in the minutes. Anytime a guy is playing 31 off the bench like he did against Memphis the other night, you kind of have to pay attention. And part of that is DeAndre Ayton. He's dealing with a hand injury. He's missed the last 2 games. If Ayton continues to miss time, very interested in Jabari Walker. If not, probably going to be a little shaky.
Walker is a guy who I'm like interested in him from a dynasty league perspective.
Sure.
And I think he could have some stuff going for him this year. He's very unique skill set. Like, excellent offensive rebounder, averaging 3.4 per 36. Pretty good on the steals and blocks. Not amazing, but solid. Can hit some threes and has a weirdly high free throw rate, like a 33% free throw rate. So he just gets after it. I really know how to explain it. I would keep an eye on him. Add him speculatively. That's fine for sure.
Yeah, that's a good catch by you on the free throw rate. Even when he's not playing that many minutes, usually finds a way to get to the line, 2 to 4 times a night. And I think that's a metric you always want to look at. I do that for prospects in college, coming into the draft. That was something I loved about Ben Mathurin last year. It's like, it's tough for rookies to get to the line as much as he did. And it's kind of come back to earth, unfortunately, this season. But if you're trying to separate, this morass of like young guys who you haven't really heard of, or like, is this guy even going to be in the league in a couple of years? Things like that, assist rate, block rate, free throw rate. Those are some of the numbers to look into. Let's see. Dave asks, is Aaron Nesmith a hold coming off of an injury, or is it better to drop him for a streaming spot? His playoffs begin in week 20. Good question, because I feel like before Nesmith went down, we were getting a lot of questions about him, and he was coming on strong. Has not played well in his 2 games since returning from injury. You want to give him some benefit of the doubt, but he did have that 12-game run, leading up. I think it was right up to the All-Star break. 16 points, 6 rebounds, 2.5 assists, 1 steal. Was shooting it really well from 3, which is always going to be his calling card. I would be okay streaming that spot. I don't think it's like you have to hold Aaron Nesmith. To me, it depends on the size of your league. In a 14 or a 16 team league, you're probably not going to do a whole lot better. In a 10 or a 12 team league, you'll probably find someone each week that you like more.
Yeah, I don't think you're going to lose your league off of this move. Like, I don't think this is a league deciding move necessarily. What I will say is I don't think anything has really changed. I think he's just kind of bothered by the ankle injury over the past 2 games since he came back. So I think the reason you've presumably been holding Nesmith since December, I think those reasons are still the reasons you would want to hold him now. It's just he's had a couple bad games and was hurt. But again, not someone who's so elite that you have to hang on to him if you want to stream instead.
Johnny asks, any info on Mark Williams or Julius Randle? Unfortunately, no. With Mark Williams, we're about 2 weeks out from the date that they said we'd get another update. I have very little optimism on him. I think, even if he were to come back in, let's say, 2 weeks, there's probably a ramp up period given how much time he's missed. Unless your league goes to game 82, I don't really think it's worth it. Randle, Knicks have been pretty mum. We got that update a little over a week ago that he's hoping to avoid surgery. That was a little scary, because I kind of thought we were past that. But now there are videos coming out of him, warming up, getting workouts in before games. So my guess is he's going to dodge surgery. But I have not. The Knicks have not put a date out there for a potential return.
Right. Yeah. I mean, both of these teams are keeping very quiet on these injuries. I think Randall's going to come back, hopefully soonish. Mid-March, I think, is like best case scenario. Mark Williams, I just would not be surprised if he's out for the year. No update all the updates have been getting worse since since he was doubtful. Then he was out. Then he was out 2 weeks. Then he was out 4 weeks. It's just worse every time.
All right. Ravis says, hey guys, love the show. Appreciate you watching, man. What are your thoughts on Podziemski going forward? So he's missed 2 games in a row with a knee issue. Doesn't seem to be anything too serious. Obviously, Warriors are down Andrew Wiggins for the 2nd straight year under mysterious circumstances. They're off today. They're off tomorrow. They play a back-to-back Wednesday, Thursday at home against Milwaukee and Chicago, and then they finish out their 3-game week on Saturday. So hopefully we get Podziemski back for at least one of those back-to-backs. I'm pretty in on Podziemski. I mean, with Chris Paul back in the mix, and Clay, kind of doing better off the bench. He had not really played well in his last 3 games. The usage had been down. He was taking about 10 to 11 shots per game for a while there. And then the return to CP, I think, is going to cut into that for him. So rest of this season, I'm not super excited, but long term, I'm pretty interested. You talk about looking into some of the metrics for a player like Podziemski. Obviously, he passes the eye test. I think that was clear right away. Like when he first started playing for them early in the season, you're like, all right, who is this random dude? Like, is this the second coming of Nico Mannion? No, he immediately looked great. How many rebounds per game do you think he averaged in his sophomore year at Santa Clara?
This completely blind guess. I'm going to guess like 6.5. I don't know.
8.8 rebounds per game in his final collegiate season. Kind of an outlier in some ways, but those are the type of things you keep an eye on, right? Like somebody his size, he's not like a crazy athlete by any means. He's averaging almost 6 boards per game. He was averaging almost 4 assists per game. Like it doesn't really have much of a weakness to me, which is fairly rare for a rookie guard. And yeah, you could argue he's been in a good spot in a good system in Golden State, but I'm really interested in him long term. It's just kind of a question of the rest of this season. Where does he fit in? Like there's always been one missing piece. As soon as CP3 comes back, Wiggins goes out. Clay's moving to the bench, then he's not on the bench, and now it looks like he'll be there permanently. So I think it's going to be very up and down for him for the rest of this year. But long term dynasty, I really like Podziemski.
Yeah, Podziemski's stat line shades of like DiVincenzo for Golden State. Some Josh Hart type stuff going on there. But yeah, I completely agree with you, Nick. It's just a guy who he knows how to pass the ball. He can rebound, decent defensively, at least in terms of getting steals. Yes, needs to get the free throw line a little bit more, but like he's 6'4", 205. He's a guard. Like it's going to be tough for him. In terms of this season, yeah, I mean, the return of Chris Paul is going to significantly impact what Podziemski is doing. I mean, I think Podziemski is a good enough 3-point shooter and rebounder where he's going to just be out there doing stuff. Like Kerr is just going to continue to give him 25 to 30 minutes every night. But I think his ceiling is kind of just, it kind of gets decimated with Chris Paul back. I don't hate the idea of dropping him to stream guys in. I would just maybe wait another week to see really what his usage looks like. And then the mysterious Wiggins absence that's just, it's tough to even evaluate that. Like, who knows? He could come back tomorrow. He could come back never. You just don't know.
Grayson Allen or Buddy Hield in a head-to-head points league. So Roto, I would be all over Buddy Hield, but points makes this a little more interesting, especially in light of the Booker injury. Grayson Allen's actually been a slightly better points league guy this year than Hield. Obviously in category leagues, Buddy Hield giving you like a minimum of 2 or 3 threes every single night is pretty huge. But Grayson Allen's not played well of late. I think there's been a little bit of a panic there because he had been so good, earlier in January and into February, but he's got 16 total points in his last 3 games. The shooting is kind of dried up. He's like 4 of 25 from 3 in that span. My guess is it comes back around. You're kind of buying low here if you're trading for him. Maybe somebody threw him out on the waiver wire. I think it's close though. I mean, it's really close. They're separated by about 1 fantasy point per game in points leagues. I think Buddy Hield if you want the security, Grayson Allen if you want a little bit more upside, but ultimately, I think these guys are in the same general range.
Yes. We still don't. This DeAnthony Melton injury for Philly is starting to get worrying. Like he came back, played 16, 18, and then 9 minutes, and then he's just out again indefinitely. That would be my main concern on the Hield side would be like Melton coming back. But I think I'm just going to lean Hield because I don't know if Melton's going to be right. Hield has been really aggressive in Philly. He's showing up some more passing lately. And I think if Maxey misses any time, it would be better for Hield than if like Bradley Beal missed time than it would be for Grayson Allen. Like I think Buddy Hield can absorb usage better, if that makes sense.
Okay, we'll hit a few more of these and we'll be out. Danny says, are you guys still holding on to Desmond Bane in your IR? Will he even play it all the rest of the season? I'll put it this way. I am holding him in one league, but it's one where I just haven't really had too many injuries. I think I'm in like 3rd or 4th in that league, and dropping him to me, it's a deep league, deep rosters. There's not enough upside there. It's like my only chance to really climb in and like try to win this league is if Desmond Bane comes back and looks like Desmond Bane. Like there's nobody else out there who I could fill that spot with that would give me enough upside to truly move up to where I need to get. So for me personally, in that situation, I'm holding him and just hoping for the best, but obviously would not be surprised if he doesn't play. They announced, I think about 2 weeks ago that, he's progressing well, whatever that means. And, is expected to return sometime in mid to late March. Again, the Grizzlies season is over. He hasn't played since January 12th. If there's any sort of setback, he's not coming back, but I'm a little optimistic, and the league where I'm holding him does go through game 82. So that's a little different too. Right? If your fantasy playoffs are starting up in a week, then I would probably handle it differently.
Yeah. I mean, I'd be surprised if he came back. Let's put it that way. Am I holding him in my IR? If I don't have to drop anybody, like Nick said, Nick's holding him because if Bane comes back, it's going to help Nick move up the standings. But that's only because Nick doesn't really have that many other injuries in his league. If Nick had 3 other guys who were hurt and he could put on IR, then you would probably just drop Bane because he needs production like now. So if you need production now, you got other guys, drop Bane. If you don't need production right now, your team is healthy, regardless of where you are in your league, just keep him in your IR.
Johnny says, what do you think of Norman Powell with the Westbrook injury? I guess maybe we should have mentioned this at the top. Russell Westbrook, like Scottie Barnes, fractured left hand over the weekend. Looking at probably a similar timetable. I think on our site, we ruled him out for about a month, could be longer. Obviously the Clippers are in a much different situation than Toronto, but that does open things up in LA. It's worth noting that Westbrook, and there's some nights where he was struggling to even get to 20 minutes. So it's not like he's a 35-minute-a-night guy, but it should be about 20, 22 minutes on both nights that now need to get redistributed. I'm interested in Powell. I'm holding him in some leagues. He's, it's kind of the guy you hold for 3 weeks, you drop him, maybe you grab him later. Looked good against Minnesota yesterday, but did hit 6 threes. Can't necessarily depend on that. But by default, I like him more now with Russ out.
Yeah, Powell is the ultimate microwave scorer. I can't think of the right word. He's just like a sixth man personified.
Yes.
So he's going to come in, he's going to fire. Yeah, I like him here. We saw in the past 2 games, Bones Highland re-entered the rotation, 16 minutes in the game before last, and then 14 minutes. So I think Bones Highland, a combination of Bones, Terrence Mann, and Norman Powell will probably take Russ's 20 to 25 minutes. I don't know if any of them are massively better because, like Nick said, Russ wasn't seeing that many minutes, and he also wasn't taking that many shots. So you're kind of distributing like 10 shots between 3 guys. So, so they might average like a couple more points, a couple more minutes.
All right, good question here from Matt. We touched on the Jazz earlier. He said, are you concerned about Lauri Markkanen missing more games with the fantasy playoffs starting? Honestly, yes, I am. We talk about some of these injuries that I'm not saying they're fake, but it's like, could you play through it? Yeah, well, we kind of wouldn't mind falling down the draft standings a little bit here. Why don't you take your time? I don't think he's going to get like completely shut down, but I could totally see this being a multi-game injury. Markkanen's always been like a little bit fragile. Sometimes when he misses time, a 1 or 2 game injury turns into 3 or 4. And I believe Utah has 3 games this week anyway. So I know the league where I have Markkanen, I kept him out of my lineup entirely. You're looking at 2 games as a best case in a week when a lot of teams have 4. So I wouldn't drop him at this point, but definitely concerned. What about you?
I'm concerned. I think he's a guy like Jaren Jackson. If you can move off of him and get roughly equal value, you just do it. You just do it. Like if, on the season in 8-cap, Markkanen's ranked 27th. He hasn't played that well lately. He's more of like in the 50 range over the past month. But if someone wants to trade you Kristaps Porzingis, if someone wants to trade you Fred VanVleet or something like that, or someone else in that range who you don't think is going to get shut down, maybe Evan Mobley, I think you just do that just to be safe.
All right, we are at the point in the season, Alex, where we're being asked, Vasilije Micic or Trey Mann? This is a big question. I mean, these are 2 guys that are going to swing fantasy leagues. So first and foremost, Cody Martin missed their last game, and Seth Curry's missed 2 of the last 5. So I think that's been part of the recent uptick for Micic. Obviously, no LaMelo Ball as well. That's been the biggest factor. Micic started against Toronto on Sunday, 12.6 assists, 2 steals. He had 13, 7 and 2 in the previous game against Philly. I'm intrigued. He's not much of a shooter, so you got to keep that in mind. You're really looking at the assists and the steals more than anything. And Trey Mann has cooled off, right? I mean, I think that one, I had delusions that this was going to be like the late season waiver pickup that bails me out in a couple of leagues. And it hasn't been the case. He's not shooting all that well. I mean, the biggest thing is, the 3-point shooting tends to come and go. He didn't even take a single one against Toronto yesterday. That was a little concerning. Prior to that, he was 2 of 9 over the last couple of games. Still giving you assists, still a very good rebounder for a guy who's point guard eligible, and still giving you steals. So I think these are going to be really comparable. But do you have a lean one way or the other?
I mean, I would just lean Mann because the assists are, I don't want to say they're that close. I think Mann just has more upside, and he fits the timeline of the Hornets more. There's 0 chance Mann gets shut down. And I think if LaMelo does come back, then Micic is probably the one who sees his minutes reduced. But if you are in a category league, and I think you could just pick the guy for whatever you need. If you need assists, like desperately, just pick Micic. If you need a little bit more of a rounded, like steals, some points, some threes upside, go with Man. But if you're asking me just straight up points league, everything neutral, I'm going to lean Trey Man.
All right. We got a Duop Reath question. Is he a better pickup if DeAndre Ayton continues to miss time? Ayton, as of right now, questionable to play in their next game. So we'll see. You just never know with DeAndre Ayton. They play tonight against Minnesota. They play Wednesday, Friday, Saturday. So 4-game week for Portland. So let's say it's, Reath versus Jabari Walker. In points leagues, they've been pretty comparable. Walker's been a little bit better. In category leagues, I could see why you might lean Reath. In his 13 starts this season, 12.5 points, 6.5 rebounds, 1 block, 1.7 threes. I still think I would probably rather own Jabari Walker.
It's close, like fantasy point per minute wise. Reath actually has the advantage, but Reath also has not really shown that he can play extended minutes, partially because he is a foul machine. Like you look at his game logs, 13 minutes, 3 fouls, 13 minutes, 3 fouls, 13 minutes, 3 fouls, like all the time. And Walker can play multiple positions. Reath can only play one. So no matter who gets hurt or who sits out in Portland's front court, Walker can get more minutes. The only way Reath is getting more minutes is if DeAndre Ayton sits. So I think I would rather lean Walker, even if Reath has moderately more like per minute upside.
Okay, last thing I want to hit quick, Alex, before we jump out of here. We talked last week about, who's going to be the number 1 pick. How much do you have to consider Victor Wembanyama for that number 1 pick? I feel pretty strongly that he'll be in that mix. But looking at the first round overall, there's not as much turnover in fantasy basketball in round 1 as there is in fantasy football, where Austin Eckler was going like number 3 overall this year, and he's going to go like number 70 in 2024. Like that doesn't really happen very often. In fantasy basketball, like any major changes, I'll read you the top 12 picks on average across ESPN, CBS, Yahoo, Underdog, and Fantrax. So we're pulling from all those. You can go check out our ADP report page on RotoWire. Jokic, Doncic, Giannis, Tatum, SGA, Embiid, Halliburton, Curry, Sabonis, Davis, Durant, Edwards. Those would be your top 12. But keep in mind, this is kind of a blend of points leagues and category leagues. So that's why Giannis is up there at 3. If Wembanyama's going in the first round, I'm going to tell you that right now. And, there'll probably be 1 or 2 other players who maybe work their way into that mix. Who drops out? Like, is there anybody in that group that you say, all right, maybe I'm not touching them in that range next year?
I think so. I think Sabonis, look, he's really good. His floor is so high. I just think people are going to ask themselves, would I rather have Sabonis or this other guy who has higher upside? And they're a lot of time like, would you rather have Sabonis or AD? I'd rather have AD. Would you rather have Sabonis or Curry? Still Curry. Would you rather have Sabonis or Wembanyama? Still Wembanyama. Sabonis or Durant? I'd probably just take KD. So I think, to me, out of those 12 guys that you listed, I think it will be Sabonis that does fall out. And partially because in category leagues, he's just only good at like 2 things. Right. No, 3 things. I mean, scoring, rebounding, assists, yeah. But he's giving you nothing defensively. That can be a problem, with centers. But I think his upside is just really capped.
I think for me, it would be Kevin Durant. And okay. I was kind of beating the drum of like, I don't know if I'd take him in the first round this year. And, that has not been a great call because he's been the 7th most valuable fantasy player in total value, not per game. He's always great per game. But he stayed pretty healthy this year. He's looked like himself. The recent history strongly suggests that he's going to miss more time next year. You can say the same about LeBron and AD and some other guys. I get that. But, Durant has not finished in first round value since 2019. In fantasy because of all the time missed. And, one of those, he missed a complete season. So I think he would be the guy where, you look at, he's probably, if things finish as they do, he'll be a top 10 fantasy guy yet again. I think that would be the one I would fade where I'm saying, look, I love the way he plays. I don't even think he's going to like drop off a cliff next year, even though he's going to get older. I think he could somewhat follow the LeBron path and play really well close to age 40 if he wants to. But I just think the health track record suggests that it might go the other way in 2024.
Yeah, I think that's completely fair. And I think people will start feeling that way about Curry. I think people are going to be freaked out by Embiid next year. I think I think a lot like last year or this year, I should say, draft season, if you can, some leagues, I forget what they call it, but you can pick the draft slot that you want. NFPKC
KDS,
runs
baby.
like that. Yeah.
Kentucky Derby style. Yep.
Yeah. I think next year is going to be another year where it's like, I want to pick in the top 5 or I want to be on the turn. I don't want to deal with picks like 6 through 11. It's just, I feel like I'm always going to make the wrong choice. If I pick at 12 and Curry falls to me, oh my God, I got Curry at the turn. Same with Kevin Durant. I don't feel bad about picking Kevin Durant at 12. Do I want to pick him at 7? Not really. So I feel like that's the way fantasy basketball, at least within the past year or two, is starting to trend.
Yeah, I like that call a lot. And yeah, if you're in a league like the NFBC where you could pick your draft slot, that presents another interesting strategy piece. All right, a couple more messages that we'll read here and then be on our way out. A couple nice things in the chat. We got to acknowledge these. Matt says, thanks. You guys have been a big help all season, win or lose. It's much appreciated. Appreciate you saying that, Matt. We love doing this. Love helping you guys out. Hopefully it's been valuable. Christopher says, hey guys, great listening to you all year. The show's been here every week. Playoffs start. I lost Barnes and Booker. And he also adds that he lost Jaren Jackson, who, by the way, looks like he's going to miss his 3rd straight game. So that one, we've seen this coming, Alex. This may be the beginning of the shutdown. There's a reason that I flipped him last week for Şengün. But yeah, Christopher, condolences. That's brutal. To lose Scottie Barnes and now Devin Booker the week the playoffs start. It is what it is, man. And the Jaren Jackson thing, that's kind of felt like a slow motion car crash all year. And, it's tough because he hasn't even played that badly, but it's just the context of the season has just not been what we thought it would be for Memphis. Last thing here, Matt chimes in and says, whoever gets 1 next year gets Wemby. I think he's going to be the most popular number 1 pick. I really do. Like, barring some sort of injury between now and then, I get the security of Jokic. I get the security of Doncic. I mean, I wouldn't take Tatum number 1. But, he's always, top 7 guy, feels like every year, never misses time. SGA is starting to feel that way. So what do you think would be the share? Like, let's say you have 100 leagues. How many does Wembanyama go number 1?
Well, I will say before I answer that, over the past 30 days, Wembanyama is the number 1 fantasy player in 8 cat per game.
There we go.
Above Doncic, Jokic. I think if 100 leagues draft, he goes number 1 probably in like 60 to 75, partially because I think people, not only is he a worthy number 1 pick in like all league formats, but is super fun to roster also.
Right. Exactly.
And I think that matters. Like, we're predicting what other people will do to an extent.
Yes.
We always do a bunch of mock draft content, before the season starts. I'm gonna go on record right now. The first mock draft that we do, Wembanyama will go number 1. It will happen. There's no question. Whoever has the number 1 pick will pick Wembanyama.
That is a great point, and is exactly what I was going to say, which is there's like a I want to be the first one. I want to be the guy that takes a number 1 factor. Whereas Jokic, it's like if you said like, is there a better percentage chance that Jokic like returns value at number 1? I would say yes, just because Wembanyama is so young, and there's still some injury concern I think with his body. But there's also a chance that he like laps the field in the way Jokic was a couple of years ago. And he's averaging 4 blocks a game and 2.5 steals to go with, 22 and 13 and 5 assists. I mean, it's crazy to just dream on what the upside is with Wembanyama. The 3-point shooting's been better lately as well. And like, yeah, you want to be the guy that takes it. You want to be in on the ground floor. It's more exciting to roster him than it is Jokic at this point. So yeah, well, I think you're right. I think 70 to 75% of leagues, he'll be the number 1 pick. And depending on how this season finishes, maybe that's even higher by the time we get to next fall. Last question here from Daniel. He says, I have Jaren Jackson too. Would Cat be a good trade for him? Yes. If you can get Cat for Jaren Jackson, do this right now. You'll probably have to aim lower would be my answer, because I think anybody who's paying attention, kind of knows the risks here, right? So I was trying to trade him before last week. I'm glad I snuck it in before this latest absence, because this feels like the start of, if it's not a complete shutdown, they're going to be very cautious. There's no reason for him to be playing every game and playing 35 minutes a night the rest of the way.
Yeah, I agree. Trade for Cat if that's on the table. If you want someone who's better defensively, that's a good question. Yeah, because you'd be losing Jaren Jackson's 1.5 blocks and his 1.1 steals. I mean, I don't know if this is a great deal, but you could maybe try to get Jaren Jackson. Excuse me,
to trade Jaren Jackson.
Jared Allen. I can't read.
Yeah.
like a Jared Allen type. I don't know what your sort of like interest in like a Brook Lopez is. Miles Turner, if someone's gonna like, I mean, it feels like you're gonna lose if you have Triple J and you trade for Miles Turner, but again, it's all league dependent.
I think you're gonna have to take what feels like a loss and just hope that you make it up in games played. And the guy that you're getting plays 20 out of 22 games the rest of the way, and Jaren Jackson plays 11. You're going to win that deal, even if you're getting the worst player. So I think you're right. I mean, I wouldn't be scared off. Obviously you don't want to go too low. Like, don't trade him for Daniel Gafford. We're not saying that, but there's a real risk. I would say at least a 50% risk that he's like borderline unstartable some weeks because his status is either out or completely up in the air. All right, that'll do it today. Good questions all around, guys. Appreciate the kind words. We've enjoyed doing this with everybody all season. We'll, of course, keep doing it through the end of the regular season and into the playoffs. So we are not done yet. We'll do some concept episodes. We'll do mock drafts. We'll do, what does the first 25 picks look like next year? We'll kind of mix in more of that look ahead content, big picture content going forward. But we'll still be doing 5 episodes a week, at least through the end of the regular season. So you can catch Dr. A tomorrow. You can catch myself and Brandon Kravitz on Wednesday, Dr. A and Rick Kamla on Thursday, and then Alex, Ken, and Shannon doing the waiver wire on Friday.